10 minutes prior to Outbreak. Falconer's Porsche sat so low to the ground that I had to squat to get into it. The interior smelled like the leather shop at the mall. I saw I had dragged some muddy leaves from outside onto the spotless carpet, and I felt like I had desecrated it. How could you drive a car like this without going crazy with worry? How could you eat a burrito in this thing? You'd be in constant fear of squirting refried beans everywhere. I have no idea how he afforded such a car, and I thought it'd be impolite to ask. Maybe he sold drugs on the side. I sat awkwardly, the handcuffs digging into my lower back. I could see my bedroom window from where the Porsche was parked, orange flames licking up behind the glass, eating the curtains. On the sidewalk in front of the Porsche sat John, another set of handcuffs holding his hands behind his back. Actually, he got those white plastic zip-tie cuffs. I got the metal ones, so clearly Falconer recognized me as the more dangerous suspect. John was watching my house burn to the ground as a dozen firefighters rolled out hoses from the two trucks. It was strangely serene. If this whole ordeal had been a movie, this would play under the credits. But Falconer was pissed. He was moving from one fireman to the next, flashing his badge and shouting for them to back off. They were doing no such thing. I had gathered from Munch, John's friend, bandmate, and part-time fireman, that neither cops nor firefighters take kindly to the other group telling them how to do their jobs. This was a fire. They were firefighters, and by God, they were going to put that shit out. Neighbors were gathering. House fires are already good entertainment in a neighborhood like this, where the primary forms of recreation are drinking alcohol and inventing excuses to keep the unemployment benefits coming, but the address made this one a bigger deal. They knew who lived here. Everyone heard the rumors. I saw two people filming the scene with their phones. Another fire truck pulled up, and one of the crew went up to John. I recognized Munch Lombard in his firefighting garb, his neck tattoos making him look less like a fireman and more like the lead singer in a novelty rap/metal band with a firefighter theme, maybe named something like Fahrenheit 187. The two men were having a surprisingly casual conversation, considering one of them was sitting on the ground in handcuffs, and behind the other was a raging inferno slowly transmitting a bungalow into the atmosphere via a thick column of black smoke. Water arced into the air from one of the hoses. My bedroom window exploded and fingers of fire clawed at the siding, leaving blackened marks behind. Falconer was on his phone again. More rubberneckers showed up. None of it mattered. At the end of the day, all that happened was Frankie had a bad encounter with something nasty, something undisclosed. One of the risks of the job in this town. Some people got hurt, but now Frankie was dead, and the nasty things inside him were disintegrating in a 1,200-degree house-sized blast furnace. As for Detective Lance Falconer, well, he was good and pissed. Probably because his evidence was going up in smoke with it. He'd probably pushed to get John and me charged with 24 crimes, everything from obstructing a police investigation to public nudity. Let him. It had come to nothing. The chief knew what town he worked in. Sure, he'd put somebody on the case, then come back a month later and tell the prosecutor there's not enough to take me to court, then I'll go quietly and go away. Again. I'd been through all this before. Nobody wants what goes on in this town to get out. They'll sweep it under the rug, just like the incident with the pizza delivery guy. I take a few hours of mandated counseling. In exchange, I don't tell people what's really going on and start a panic. I watched flames dance in every window in front of me. The house burning down wasn't even that big of a deal in my life. I could stay at John's place until I found an apartment or trailer somewhere. Besides, I still owned the hunk of land the house was about to fertilize with its ashes. Could sell that for a couple $1,000s at least, right? See? Everything would be fine. My eyes slipped closed. So little sleep in those 30-plus hours since the bed spider showed up. My phone screamed, from my jacket pocket. That had to be Amy, since the only other person who ever called me was sitting on the sidewalk with his hands cuffed behind his back. As were mine, so the phone would just have to ring. Something caught my attention outside. Just around the corner from the bedroom, a firefighter was on the ground, laying face down, in the grass. I was about to yell at one of the firemen standing around to go help, but another guy was already headed over there. He got his companion up on his knees, but he was clutching his throat. Probably just swallowed some smoke. Or ate something too fast. Nobody else was coming to help out because out front things were getting complicated. A city cop car got there first, making a total of 6 vehicles parked along the street, including my truck and John's caddy. An RV with a square blue logo on the side trailed behind it, what I assumed was from the feds Falconer mentioned. I guess the Centers for Disease Control. I suddenly realized how much inconvenience this whole thing had caused a lot of people. Out from the RV filed guys in those white spacesuits they used to protect themselves from germs, with the hood and the big clear plastic faceplate. They kind of stood around aimlessly when they saw that the structure they were supposed to quarantine was in fact going up in flames, was being attended to by firefighters, and was surrounded by a crowd of 24 gawking Midwesterners. Some of the spacesuit guys approached the firemen were almost certainly explaining why they couldn't remain on the scene unless they got some of those suits of their own, since there was an unknown flesh-eating biological pathogen on site and the place was under quarantine. The firefighters were presumably pointing out they didn't have any of those suits on hand and they couldn't leave because, the fire still wasn't out. Then Falconer and the 2 local cops joined the conversation, presumably to explain that, oh, by the way, this was also a crime scene, with the dead headless cop, arson, and willful destruction of evidence. Behind them, a Humvee rolled up and the street in front of my house was now a goddamn stationary parade. Out stepped an officer from the National Guard, who I guessed was the guy put in charge of the manhunt for Frankie, who appeared to be loudly asserting that this was his show, since roasting behind those walls was the man he had been charged with finding. Behind them, a white Channel 5 news van pulled up, shitting a cameraman from the rear doors before the wheels even stopped turning. Meanwhile, the crowd of bystanders was doubling every 5 minutes, as text messages flew furiously through the air to announce that the coolest freaking thing ever was going on down at the old Juan place right this very minute. The whole situation was devolving into what John would later refer to as, quote, a fucktard circus. I shifted my gaze back toward behind the house. Oh. The fireman was flat again. His protective hat laying a few feet away. His friend nowhere to be found. Maybe he went for help? Suddenly, several things hit me at once. 1. That the fireman was missing his head. 2. The fact the hat that was laying a few feet away still had the head in it. 3. The realization that this was not the body of the guy who was hurt earlier. This was the guy who came to help. 4. A fist, which smashed through the window and knocked me out cold. When I came to a few seconds later, I was being dragged through the grass and... I was being dragged through the glass and people were screaming. I landed with a thud on the grass outside the Porsche. A pair of arms coated in black sleeves of a firefighter's coat were clenched around my chest, dragging me across my lawn. Something was clasped in one of the hands, red and white and shaped like a horseshoe. My vision came into focus enough for me to realize it was a human jawbone, complete with a full set of teeth. One of the molars had a silver filling in it. With each passing foot, things got a little warmer and a little smokier, which my bell-run brain finally realized meant I was being dragged toward the fire. I thrashed to get out of the man's grip, my hands still pinned behind me in handcuffs. The burst of panic-fueled strength got me free, for the moment anyway, and tried to crawl away from him. A boot came down on my back. I fought and managed to roll over. The fireman, a huge, strapping guy, was missing the lower half of his face, where his jawbone should have been, and presumably had been all of his life until a few minutes ago, was the mouth and a dozen black wiggling feet of my spider. It looked like a bit charred in places. Half-faced firefighter threw off his fireman's jacket. He lifted his right arm and 2 thin, sharp, white protrusions emerged from his wrist, kind of like Wolverine's claws, except when Wolverine pushed his out, his hand didn't immediately fall off, as happened here. From the wrist stump, the 2 protrusions grew and sharpened, then a red split appeared at the man's wrist, growing down to his elbow. With a wet tearing sound, his forearm pulled itself into 2 lengthwise halves, the 2 bones of the forearm splitting apart like blades open on a pair of scissors. Half-faced firefighter's scissor arms brandished his new appendage and leaned down. His forehead exploded. Gunshots hammered the air, screams from all around. Half-faced bloody head stumbled back. It was Falconer, advancing behind his enormous chrome handgun. It fired again and again, shots punching bloody holes in a firefighter-issue t-shirt, but the man just would not go down. I was up and on my feet and running, off balance and stumbling with my hands pinned behind me. I heard Falconer let out a frustrated, growling scream. I spun and saw Half-Face grab the detective around the base of the skull. He forced Falconer's head down to waist level, then turned his body away from him, holding Falconer's face directly in front of his buttocks. Half-Face farted. Falconer collapsed to the leaves, as if dead. Another gunshot smacked Half-Face in the shoulder. Annoyed, he held up his scissored arm. The 2 sharpened bones rotated at the elbow joint, slow at first, and then faster and faster until they were twirling at the elbow like a band leader's baton, whizzing through the air and throwing off flecks of blood and meat. Half-faced firefighter bloody head spin bones strode towards the burning house with purpose, directly toward my bedroom window, where a column of fire was rushing upward, causing the gutter above it to melt and sag like saltwater taffy. Starting from the foundation, he angled his spinning appendage into the wall, tearing a ragged hole in the siding and insulation behind it, making a sound like a jackhammer. He made a vertical gash about chest high, leading up to the bottom left corner of the broken window. Cops screamed commands around me. One was tending to Falconer, the other was shouting about backup. Half-faced finished his cut, then made another one a few feet to the right of it, again ending at the window. He was turning the window into a door. "Hey, Dave!" It was John. His plastic handcuffs were cut, but he still wore the loops around his wrists like a pair of cheap bracelets. Munch came running up behind him, looking panic-stricken. He was carrying a huge set of bolt cutters. "Turn around!" Half-Face bashed out the rest of the glass with his remaining fist. Then he reached through the window and pulled. A burning section of wall fell at his feet. Behind it was the charred, melting springs and frame that had been my bed. The flames roared, fueled by the new rush of oxygen. John took the bolt cutters from Munch and went to work on my handcuffs. To Munch, he screamed, "Run! Take Dave's Bronco! The keys are in it! Drive until you're someplace nobody speaks English!" My hands were free. Explosions erupted a few feet away, a cop going to work on Half-Face with a riot gun. The monster was down on his knees. I saw a shot blow a hole in his neck and his head flopped over, dangling by a tendon. There was victory. For about 3 seconds. Then, the cop started screaming. The cop next to him started screaming. The nearest firefighter started screaming. They were clawing and swatting and scraping at themselves, trying to knock away tiny biting monsters they could not see. Then I looked back at my house and understood. I just killed the world. Black, wiggling shapes fanned out from the hole in the wall, spilling in waves over the broken boards and plaster on the lawn, disappearing into the grass. A firefighter ran up with a bullhorn, raised it, and shouted, "Warning! We have toxic fumes! Everyone, and I mean everyone, leave the area if you do not have breathing." Ah! A spider was eating his eyeball. A bystander, shooting the scene on his phone, had a baby spider on his hand and another in his hair. I couldn't breathe. This was not happening. This was not possibly happening. A hand on my elbow, pulling me away. John saying something I couldn't hear. Everything was silent. My brain had frozen up. People were running. It all seemed very familiar. John was pulling me along. I caught the eyes of Detective Falconer, who was back up now, trying ineffectually to help a heavy teenage girl get the spider off her neck. His look spoke clearly. "Take it all in, white trash. You did this." He was right. Before the fire, we had the parasites imprisoned inside the house. The feds could have roped it off, sealed it up, kept all the bystanders safely away. They could have taken their time figuring out how to neutralize the threat. We could have told them what we knew, told them not to get within 100 yards without mouth protection, and to bury the house under a mountain of concrete. Instead, the fire had drawn a crowd. First the firefighters with no protection, then the gawkers who crowded around like a goddamned all-you-can-eat parasite buffet. They would all die. Maybe everyone would die. Maybe the parasites would own the planet. And it would all be my fault. It was the DVD sticker situation all over again. We ran. We bumped into CDC News with holes chewed through their spacesuits. We shouldered past confused National Guardsmen. We dodged the Action 5 News camera guy and a lady reporter demanding an interview from someone, anyone. We piled into the caddy, a stank of turkeys, possibly because there were 2 turkeys in the back seat, live ones pecking at the seat cushions. John cranked the ignition and the Creedence Clearwater Revival blared from the dash. He stepped on the gas and we ripped through a band of yellow police tape somebody was trying to string up. Probably a little too late for that, buddy.